start that. See, there you go. Can't, yeah, I've heard that 8,000 times. That's how I knew it. But so tonight we are doing the You Asked, Parents Answered Positive Communication Between Home and School. We have several parents with us who are going to be sharing their experiences with us, and some recommendations and suggestions, and I will pose questions to them. And a lot of these questions that I'm going to be posing are actually ones that we at Family Connection receive a lot, that we hear a lot from parents. And so that's kind of how this training or how this session came about. So what I'd like to do is get started and have each of our parent panelists, Brantley, Madeira, and Catherine, introduce themselves. We'll start with Brantley, and then we'll do Madeira, and then we'll do Catherine. Just, if you will, introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about, how old is your child, and then any other information that you'd like to share that would be helpful for us before we kind of dive into some of the questions. Brantley, let's start with you.
My name is Brantley Smith, and I have two boys. My oldest is about to be 8. My youngest is going into kindergarten this fall. My youngest name is Logan, and he has severe hemophilia A. So through his preschool career, he was in a full-time preschool, and they were able to help us with his medication and had all of that at the school, and we were able to train his teachers on what he needed and what to do if he were ever to have a bleed at the school. So we are excited to enter into public school in just a week and get that started as well.
All right, thank you, Brantley. Madeira.
Hi, my name is Madeira Lawton, and we have 3 children. One is 22, kind of hard to believe that. And then we have our daughter, she's 22. We have a son who is 19. His name is Randall, and he is on the autism spectrum and was also diagnosed with ADHD. And he also just recently graduated. And then we also have a 13-year-old, and she is going to the 8th grade. And she also she was diagnosed with math dysgraphia. And so we've been, so I have 2, they're kind of spaced apart, but 2 that have had or have IEPs throughout their school career. One Randall from the time when he was in preschool, and then Malia from the time she was in about the 2nd grade.
All right, thank you, Madeira. And you know what I think is going to be so great with tonight is we are going to be talking about kind of the difference in communication at these different kind of ages and stages and grade levels. So I'm looking forward to that. Catherine, go ahead.
Hi, I'm Catherine Paget. I have 2 children. My son is 21 going into his senior year in college. Madeira, I feel your pain when you can't believe that's how old they are. And my youngest is Mallory. She is 12. She has a diagnosis of asthma, ADHD, and autism, and she will be starting middle school in a week. And mom's pretty stressed out about it. She's very excited, but
well, and I'm sure, Catherine, you're trying to act like you have no worries. This is great. We can't wait. But on the inside, you're dying a little bit. And
yes,
yeah, I understand. And I think that probably a lot of the other parents who are joining us tonight know the same feeling, whether it is going into middle school, going into public school for the first time, like Brantley's son, going into high school, and then going into the beyond, like Madeira's son, right? So we understand, and we're there for each other. So I wanted to start off our conversation because we know that strong communication is important. And we also know, not just our knowledge that, hey, that inherently makes sense, but research has also shown that communication is a foundation of these positive relationships that we want to make sure we have with the school. So what information do you think is important for the school or for your child's teacher to know about your child, maybe at the start of the year? Is there any information in particular that you think is important for them to know?
Well, I'll jump in. I think it's extremely important for them to know if there are any, for lack of a better term, triggers or unusual circumstances that they need to be aware of from day one. Things that can happen and how they need to handle those if that is the situation. And I'm sure Brantley can probably talk more to that too.
I just think it's important for them just to have even a 5-minute conversation or a 2-minute email that you typed up that they can read in just a couple of minutes. If they don't have their IHP or their individualized health care plan in front of them, or they don't have their IEP yet, because those kind of things can trickle in the first couple of weeks. Just a heads up and just kind of saying these are the quick things to look for. I know as a parent, I know everything about my child, and it's easy to write a book about them. But just because I know the craziness of the beginning of school, just a quick thing or quick couple of things that they can be mindful of. Is that kind of what you were asking? Just that kind of first starting? Okay.
Yeah. Madeira, what do you have any thoughts on that?
I would say definitely what Brantley and Catherine has already said. And with Randall, it was pretty important that they knew about his allergies, because when he was younger, he had a lot of food allergies. And I made sure to bring something in for him as well, so that, those first days, sometimes they give out treats and things like that, so that he could also have something. But I would say, in addition to what they said, I remember when Randall first started, he went from preschool, preschool, and his first year of kindergarten, he was in a self-contained classroom. And then his second year, he repeated kindergarten, and he went to the same school as his sister, which was such a big deal. And he was in Gen Ed. And because I was aware that there are times when a general ed teacher is not necessarily going to maybe view your child the same as a special ed teacher, I remember that when he went, I wrote a note to his teacher, and I communicated with her all the wonderful things about Randall, because I didn't want her to see him as just a kid with a disability. And I wanted her to see that he wasn't his disability. You know what I mean? And so I told her how he could play the drums. I told her how much he liked to play different things. I told her things that he already knew, what he was capable of. And I actually assured her that she was going to love him because he was such a fun kid. And so I wanted that to be, her thought process, that this is what this parent thinks of her own child, So I would encourage that to happen, to definitely, in addition to stressing your child's, what they may need help with, also to let them know of those things that your child are very capable of and what makes them, their personality.
Now, all right, so Brantley, you had mentioned maybe sending, a short email or something like that. Madeira, you had mentioned, sending something that says, hey, these are all of the really great things about Randall. These are all of the things that he's really good at, and you are going to love this kid. Do you guys recommend doing that in, Brantley, you had mentioned an email, doing it in an email? I've seen some parents do kind of like a 1-page sheet, almost like an all about me kind of sheet. Have you ever done something like that? How, or do you prefer, going in and doing kind of a one-on-one meet the teacher kind of thing?
I, for, for me, I actually prefer to do both. So I did definitely meet with the teachers. I like to do that as soon as we can. And usually that it doesn't happen, like say their week when they're in school. If it could, that would just be awesome, before my child arrives. But usually I meet with them as soon as I can. And then I do like I said, I did send a letter. I gave her the letter. I think it might have been, I think it was actually when we didn't meet the teacher. So that was like a good time. If you get there at a good time and before it gets crowded, it's a good opportunity for you to then, just list those things and talk to them about those things. And then I also followed up with an email. So I would just kind of in the email reiterate what was discussed and just let them know that I was grateful for them taking time to speak with me and giving them my personal information if they should have any questions or concerns.
Brantley or
Taking
Kathy?
notes. I'm taking notes from Madeira just because I haven't been there yet. So that sounded all wonderful. I know with the preschool, they had like a teacher work day. And we got to go in and kind of train all of the teachers because we knew how quickly they move up in a preschool. Just to kind of let the whole building be aware of his health diagnosis and what would be needed. And there's a lot of switching around in preschool of, just covering each other's classes. But Madeira, I really loved everything that you suggested. So thank you.
Now, I have a question for you, Brantley. Whenever you said, and I understand, preschool was probably a private preschool. It was a lot smaller than like the public school. But whenever you said letting everybody know, you had said in the building, but, everybody know who's in the preschool. How would you, or how do you plan on handling that this year now that Logan's going to be at a public school in terms of sharing information?
I'm hoping that his nurse, that we can have a very open communication with her. And I'm still kind of figuring that out and how that's going to work. I know with my oldest, I'm familiar with her and we've been through the school building and I know what she looks like, but just as far as sitting down and having a one-on-one conversation, and we actually have a welcome back night this Thursday. So I know she was there last year and was at her door waving. So I'm just kind of stepping in and kind of figuring all of those things out. And then for meet the teacher night, I love what Madeira said about just having like a little note that kind of hands, because I know there's a lot going on that night and the teachers are trying to take everybody in and all that kind of stuff, but just kind of saying, hey, I just wanted to give this to you to read later. I think is a great idea.
Catherine, what are you thinking with Mallory going into middle school? What is going to be kind of your approach with that?
Well, still kind of figuring a lot of that out. She is in self-contained class, and I am thankful that they have multiple classes and they are near each other. So, they'll change classes and that type of thing, just like the kids in Gen Ed. And so I'm thankful for that, but I'm also thankful for that little bit of separateness, if you will, which I know we really don't ultimately want, but at the same time, middle school's hard for everybody, regardless of a diagnosis. It's just a tough time in a kid's life. So to know that she'll have her little safety net, if you will, close by, the majority of the time, is definitely good for me.
Well, and you're exactly right. I mean, lots of people, you hear people say, oh man, I'd love to go back to high school, or oh my gosh, college was great. I'd do anything to be back in college. I have never once heard anyone say, man, if I could go back to middle school, that would be no one says that. Middle school's horrible. It's hard. Okay, no offense if anyone's a middle school teacher, okay? But it's kind of horrible sometimes, you know. So I get what you're saying. And Brantley, whenever you mentioned about, understanding that, gosh, the beginning of school, but especially, meet the teacher night and all that stuff can be so chaotic and busy, and you're trying to, the teacher, is trying to take in all this information about all these kids and all their parents and all of that. I've had parents before that if they do kind of like a little one pager, or something where they're sending information about their job, they put their kid's picture on there. So because I know for me, if I can put someone's face with all this information, I've got a lot better shot of remembering it versus, wait a minute, there's a kid in here named Melissa and she's highly motivated by chocolate. If I see a picture of Melissa, then, I know, okay, that's the one I need to have the Hershey for, or the whatever for if I have allergies. So, all right. So let's see. I was thinking of some other questions that we might have in terms of maybe how, and this is really more for Catherine and Madeira, since you both have the older children. Have you noticed that the communication needs, one, does the communication change a lot from whenever your child was in elementary school? And even maybe, Catherine, for you, since Mallory's going into middle school, earlier elementary versus later elementary. And then Madeira, for you, with both kids going from, elementary to middle, and then Randall going to high school, have you noticed that there's a big change in the communication that you get from the school, the direction from school to home?
I will say Mallory also did public preschool. And so we've kind of seen that spectrum from 3 on through elementary school. And in preschool, every day we were dropping off and picking up right there with the teacher. So there was multiple conversations each day about whatever, different things that were going on. And that was great. Of course, that starts to wind down in elementary school. And for us, it became more emails, or our district uses the Parent Square app, where they can, staff can send a message directly to one parent or to the whole class. And so the mode of communication really changed, and our topics did too. In pre-K, it was a lot more about milestones, social skills, different things like that. And then, of course, along the years in elementary school, it became, yes, those things were mentioned as needed, but really the focus of the conversation was around education and what does my child need to,
Like
be their best
academics.
self.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What about you, Madeira?
Yeah, I would have to agree with Catherine on that. There was definitely, I would say, a major difference between the elementary level, preschool and elementary, to middle school. So there's a big difference there because, well, for one, I always, not to throw middle school under the bus, but I always felt like in middle school, they kind of just get thrown out there. And so they want them to be more independent, whereas in elementary school, they try to give them this safe space in order to help them feel more comfortable with being independent. So like in our district, they start middle school in the 6th grade, whereas you know, in some areas they start middle school in 7th grade. So I have a niece, her middle school starts in 7th grade. Well, they start in 6th grade here, and sometimes they're not quite ready, you know, for that full on independence. And so, you know, we've had issue with that. And then with the communication, it's not, like she said, it I don't know how to explain it. It did not feel as intimate once they got to middle school. And then when he got to high school, though, I felt like it did become more intimate because we went from the independence, and maybe around 7th, 8th grade, we started also talking about life skills, because after Randall, you know, was in gen ed for some time, he then went back to self-contained, and we started talking about life skills, preparation for after high school, self-advocating. We started having more, excuse me, more conversations about things like that as well. Choices that we have to make. So me as a parent, I will admit that during that time, I did feel like a little bit of pressure, because there were choices that needed to be made. Like, are we going to be on the diploma track? Are we going to be on this track? Or, you know, what track is going to be best for him? So all of those decisions that come about, you know, during that time. And typically, I would say, like with my oldest daughter, those decisions were a lot of hers to make with guidance from us. Whereas with my children who have an IEP, it feels like it's a lot of decisions for us to make, but of course with their input, if that makes sense. So yeah, the communication was definitely different. The topics of communication was different. And so yeah, I would have to agree with that.
Yeah, Madeira, I would agree with that as well. I have a 18-year-old son that graduated from high school back in May, and I would agree. You know, in elementary school, you feel like you get all of this communication. You know, you've got the weekly newsletter. You've got, like Catherine was saying earlier, you know, you see the teacher at drop off and pick up, and so you get all of that, and so you just feel like you get a lot more information. And then in middle school, I felt that too, where you didn't get as much. But high school, you know, whenever he had a resource teacher, we got a lot more information from the resource teacher, you know, and so we felt like we were more in the loop. But again, we are getting ready to make kind of a transition, because Cameron will be starting at the technical college in the fall. And so, you know, whenever your kid is in college, whether it is my oldest one at Clemson or Cameron at Tri-County Tech, where both of them, they want to talk to the student. They don't want to talk to mama. And so that is kind of an adjustment. You know, it's an adjustment for him, but it's an adjustment for mama too, you know? And so trying to kind of balance that as well. So now, Madeira, you mentioned something in one of our conversations one day, whenever we were first talking about doing this parent panel, and you had mentioned about with communication, you know, in elementary school, the fact that a lot of times, you know, or you get more opportunities to meet other parents and get communication that way. Can you share a little bit about that? Because that was a very good point that honestly, until you mentioned it, I didn't think about it.
Yeah, it's, you know, when they're in preschool and middle school is when you get the most parent interaction, and you get to know the parents of the children that your child is going to school with. You also get to know those children, and there's also more opportunities for you to volunteer, and you're volunteering within a classroom, not just with PTO. So there's a lot of opportunities there for you to have that communication, parent interaction, and interaction with your children's friends. Whereas when you get to middle school, that kind of, I don't want to say it drops off completely, but I feel like you have to definitely be the one to get yourself in there. So there's less parent interaction because a lot of times you're not in the school as much. And honestly, I didn't feel like they wanted me there as much either.
Well, or they
Um,
don't need us to chaperone the field trip because,
yes,
for the most part,
yes.
our kids can walk safely across the street. Whereas if you've got 8-year-olds, boy, you're
Mhm.
holding on to their little wrists for dear life crossing the street,
Yes. Yeah. So
And so,
if ever I was going to say, if ever there is an opportunity to do those things, though, that you just mentioned, Melissa, like chaperoning, or if they need for you to come in the classroom to help set up for something,
Mhm.
then if you can, try to take advantage of those opportunities, because it is like you don't get as much parent interaction. And for me, it just felt like, I don't know, I guess I just got, I would say, a little bit spoiled in that in elementary school, having that, and then having that parental support too, that support group with you too. And a little bit of that well, not a little bit, for me, a lot of that got lost once we did middle school. And even into high school, because you're not in the schools as often. And I don't know how it is like in other districts, but they also, once they get to middle school, they like to be the ones to mostly like do the work with your child, because they want them to learn it the way that they're teaching it, and they try to have them complete their work by a certain time, and if at all, try to have it completed before they come home, which I as a parent can appreciate that. But then
oh
at the
my
same
gosh, yeah.
time, yeah, but at the same time, I'm like, let me see your lesson plans, because I still want to know what's going on.
Right. Well, or I want to see, what is the worksheet that you're working on, or what,
Mhm.
and then also, I don't know about y'all, Catherine and Madeira, but whenever they're younger, you do see more worksheets and those sorts of things. But as they get older, so much of it is in the Chromebook, or so much of it is on the laptop, or what. And so I felt not as connected with what my child was working on. And so that could make it a little more difficult too, you know. So,
Sometimes there would be things where, like with what you mentioned, Melissa, about not seeing as much of the work, where it would, at one point we had it in the IEP that they had to share their lesson plans. And so I got to see that, and I got to see it before they started something new the following week. And sometimes they would send practice things home so that Randall could be familiar with it before they got into it, because he's the type of child that he needs the repetition in order to learn, in order to learn it. And then actually here they started requiring teachers to do that. So
okay.
they automatically send it out, but they don't always remember. And so that's when we have to just, send an email and say, hey, what's going to be, happening next week? Is anything new going to be happening? So, yeah.
And so did they that wound up being included in his IEP because of your talking with the IEP, the whole team, to say, hey, he needs this, like he needs the repetition.
Mhm.
How can we do that? Right.
Yeah,
Right.
it did. That's how it ended up in his IEP. So,
Okay.
and if I can add to, like, as far as the communication with the school, I noticed too, and Catherine, maybe you've noticed it, like, not only did their communication with us change, but mine did with, with the teachers as well. So when Randall, he's kind of like when that first child is your practice child. And so you learn things. Well, I had two practice ones. I had my child who was in gen ed and, went on through, and then I had Randall, and I learned a lot from just mistakes. I always tell people I can definitely teach you from the mistakes I've made. But with him, we did have that communication in elementary school, and in middle school, I did not at the time include him in his IEPs. I feel like I should have started including him earlier, even as early as elementary. And we don't have to discuss the hard stuff, but we can discuss the strengths and the great things. And we can say, these are things you need to work on, and then he can head on back to class. And so once we got to high school, I did know to have Randall be the one to speak for himself. Now, did he like it? No. And sometimes we would practice it at home. And if he had a concern, it didn't even have to be an IEP meeting, just a concern, of what's going on in the class, of what might be bothering him, of a problem that he might be having with another student. We would say, well, then you need to tell your teacher. And of course, he's my mom, how I get anxious when I have to speak to people. And we're like, we'll practice it, but you've got to be the one to speak up. So I kind of let him take, like I would say, be in the driver's seat. And I didn't take the back seat. I was kind of like the co-pilot. And so I would let him, let them know these things. But sometimes I would also give the teacher a heads up. Hey, Randall has to talk to you about, this situation. And then I would also have him, like when he did speak with her, if she had any questions, then she would then later on contact me and let me know, I wasn't clear about what he was trying to explain to me, what did he mean by this? And so we try to keep the lines of communication open between me and the teacher, but then also have Randall be the one to speak up for himself.
Madeira, you are enlightening me so much between the thing with the parents, and then you're right. It is not just the parent school parent communication is so important, but to include the child, the student, in that communication piece, and where it's not so much mama calling, email, and text, and mom is still the co-pilot, but having the child in the driver's seat to work on that communication to have those needs met. I think that is great. So, Catherine, do you think that is something that you could try with Mallory, or how you might try some of that with Mallory?
Yes, it is definitely a goal to do that type of thing. Who knows what we would come up with, though. If we left her to go and not left, but if she was the one responsible for going in and having the whole conversation, who knows what that conversation would actually be about. I mean, one day she had her speech teacher convinced that we went to Disney World for the weekend. I mean, she has a very active imagination also. So my husband likes to tell the teachers, we'll believe half of the things she says about you if you'll believe half of the things that she says about us.
And let's go with only the good stuff. Let's leave it at that, but maybe not.
Yeah. I am a big believer, though, in the child having that voice and learning that voice. I mean, even my son, typically developing, he was extremely shy as a little boy. And so one way we made him work on that was, when we go out to eat, you need to order. And it didn't matter if it was a sit-down restaurant or fast food. He needed to speak to the person and order. And so that just really got him going with that I can do this process. So ultimately, yes, that is exactly where I would love to get to.
Yeah, no, I think that is great. Now over the years, we know that challenges are going to arise at some point. Everything isn't going to be glitter and rainbows and all the, and Clemson wins, right? It's just not always going to be that way. We'd like for it to, but it's not always going to be that way. So, have y'all encountered any of these challenges? And if so, kind of how did you handle it? And I'm even thinking, Catherine, I'm thinking, or no, Madeira, I'm thinking with Randall's allergies, did you run into any issues where you had to say something? Or Brantley, running into anything with Logan's, health concerns where you had to stop in later and say, hey, wait a minute, it's not such a good idea to play with pins and hypodermics, or whatever. So what might be some scenarios where y'all have had, these challenges and had to have some conversations about how to correct them?
I know for Logan, he will come home and say one thing that's happened, and then, I take it as much as I can listen to him and, believe his little heart and what he believes that happened, but then also just being able to go to the teacher and also being able to keep my calmness and just my steady voice. I know that's something I'm still always a work in progress on, because it is emotional. When your child says that this has happened and it's hurt their heart and they think they're doing the right thing, but it's not, just kind of figuring all of that out. But just knowing there's always two sides, just knowing that it's a child that's telling you and knowing that the adult has, what happened as well, and not taking it so to heart. I take it to heart just sitting here talking about it. It's just, I think it's just a balance that you have to find, and just letting that teacher know that, that they care the most about your child just as much as you do, and just kind of figuring it out and just keeping that open line of communication.
Right, and going to them directly and asking. Yeah, because sometimes our imagination does run away with us, and it's better to just ask them directly. Madeira and Catherine, have y'all encountered anything like that?
I would say, yeah, to what Brandon said too, it is, like when you have certain things to happen, it does become emotional. I will admit I am that parent who has cried in IEP meetings. And like try to pull yourself together, but so yeah, there are times when it's like that, and you do sometimes the crying is not necessarily but because my heart is breaking. Sometimes the crying is because I am mad at you, and I don't know any other way to express this other than to cry, because if I express it any other way, then I might not be able to come back.
Then there'll be a restraining order.
Yeah, and we don't want that. But so you have to, like Brantley said, remain calm, when you are speaking to your teachers, and remember, in a lot of situations that they do care just as much about your child. And even if you feel, there are situations where maybe teachers don't, okay, we just got to put that out there. But we also know that there are things in place that they're required to follow. And so whether they like it or not, this is what it says it needs to be done, and this is what should be done. And then you have to, come to them, directly to them, and express that. We had a situation with Randall, not with the food. They were always good about the food, to the point of picking out his Skittles. So you would think he was a superstar. So, only the yellow and green for Randall. And then with Melia, with Melia, when we discovered that she had math dysgraphia, her teacher at that time was already pretty good about helping her and making sure that she felt comfortable and not overwhelmed. But then when she moved up to the next grade level, we did have teachers who seemed to be less understanding. And even though there were things in her IEP, we ended up, I think we might have added things into the IEP, and I myself had to explain a lot to them. So like, if she gets anxious and she's not performing well, and then it carries over to another area, then I have to then explain to them, this is what's going on. This is now carrying over to the point where she's just feeling this way about all of the subjects or two or more of the subjects. And so there were times when I did have to ask for a retest. And so it's like, don't be afraid to do that. I have asked for a retest several times. Sometimes I get a yes, sometimes I get a no. And a lot of times I was nervous about asking because I'm like, I've already asked them on the last test, and and so here I am asking again. And sometimes they comply and sometimes not. But, don't be afraid to ask. Rejoice for the yeses, and then just, when there's no's, we just have to be okay with that. But don't be afraid to ask. And so that was how we would settle that situation. And I would also point to things in their IEP and ask them to maybe go into more detail. So if there was something in the IEP that was kind of general, but I knew that there needed to be more specifics, or they pointed out things that were more specific, then I would request that it be placed in there, because then that next teacher can see that as well. For Randall, we had, what was it with him? He had bullying at one point, and the way that we handled that, of course, we spoke with the teacher, but then I also spoke with the principal. And so it's like, don't be afraid to go, above their heads, because I didn't go above their head because they weren't doing anything. It's just that what they were doing obviously wasn't working in their classroom. And that principal came up with a wonderful idea that she presented to me, which was have Randall come to me, or when he comes to you to share something, you then contact me. And she nipped it in the bud without Randall's name even being mentioned. So it would be something like, hey, somebody saw you in the hallway telling, doing this to Randall. And from then on, and then she would just take care of it, and she would discipline, as needed, without that child even knowing that Randall said anything. So it's, I would just say, definitely just don't be afraid to speak up, or if you are afraid, just do it afraid.
Just do it afraid. Yeah. Well, and Madeira, you have a good point whenever you said going to the principal, because sometimes there are things that are beyond the teacher's reach, that the teacher doesn't have any authority over, if other kids are being turkeys or bullied to your child on the bus, or, there are certain things that the teacher doesn't have any influence over. And so it is, okay, let me talk to somebody who does have authority in that realm. Catherine, what about you? Have there been any scenarios? Do you have any tips or pointers for kind of having those? None of us want to have the difficult conversations, right? Or the difficult thing. But do you have any tips on how to do that?
I think that one of the biggest things is approaching it, as Brantley and Madeira have said, that, the teacher wants to see your child succeed. They want to, do what your child needs. And, acknowledging that it is a team effort, because, what's the saying? It takes a village. I mean, it truly does. And we always take the IEP team and, really look at it as a partnership. And that's the way we approach it in the meetings as well. And so when it was time during the pandemic that we realized Gen Ed just not working for her anymore, and she's noticing it, and so she's taken hits to her self-esteem, it wasn't a good situation. And so you know, the IEP team, it was like we were all arriving there at the same time. It wasn't a, you know, I noticed it and they didn't, or whatever. But they walked with us through the process of moving her to a different school in a self-contained class. And I mean, did just a great warm handoff to the new IEP team, because of course it's a new school. So everybody's a new face. And this was during a time in the pandemic too, when schools were not allowing visitors. So she had to go into school on her first day there all by herself. No one walking her in, you know, anything like that. And this was third grade. And I mean, she was a champ about it. She did really good, but everyone made sure that she knew what to expect. And we had had multiple conversations, Google Meets, all of that with the new teacher. Mallory knew what she looked like, how many cats she had, you know, I mean, all these different things. So Mallory actually already felt like she knew her. She just hadn't seen her in person. And so that really helped her transition and getting things started off on the right foot there.
Well, and again, it is that communication, and not just communication of, I expect you to be able to read on a whatever level, and I expect you to be able to do 20 problems. It's that relationship again. You know, I have 4 cats. I have a bad dog. You know, whatever it is, that helps. But and that communication, like that, what you communicate, just like it is with adults, is also going to be different between the teacher and the different kids. You know, to Mallory, it might be, I have 3 cats. To my kid, it might be, and Madeira's son, Randall, you know, what video games do you like to play? You know, if you talk to my kid about his dog, he doesn't care. He doesn't care. But if you talk to him about anything related to video games, he's your best friend for life, you know? So you know, finding how to communicate, what to communicate on, you know, is so important for all of us, whether it's us as moms or, you know, our kids. So, all right. So kind of as we're wrapping up, what I'd like to ask each of you to do is just kind of give the rest of us, if you had 2 or 3 kind of, these are my golden rules, these are my top communication tips, what would those be? What would be your top recommendations? Whether, and Madeira and Catherine, whether it is at your child's current educational level, or it, you know, given advice to folks like Brantley, who her child is younger and she's, you know, earlier on in that journey, what would be the top advice? And I won't call on you. I'll let one of y'all volunteer.
You kind of already hit on, but I did write them down before we started. So my first one was that we're all human and that we all make mistakes. As a mom, I make mistakes every single day. So I can't expect Logan's teacher to know all the ins and outs and not make mistakes. So that was my first one. My second one was to teach my child to be their own advocate. People aren't going to mind read. And if you can communicate and tell your teacher what you need, they're going to listen, but you've got to learn to raise your hand. You've got to learn when something's hurting, when something's bothering you, to speak up. And I love, Madeira, what you said about having the child sit on an IEP meeting. I didn't mention that I was a teacher, but I do teach 4th grade. And I just, even in 4th grade, I try to teach them, like, I showed them their IEP. This is your IEP. These are your accommodations. I'm going to do my best, and we're going to make sure we hit all of these. But if one day I don't say it, and I don't call you back here or do this, and come and tell me, like, you know, just making them super aware of that. And we don't have them sit in on meetings at our school, but I'm going to suggest that to my principal because I absolutely love that idea. I did have an IEP as a child as well. So in high school, I did sit on IEP meetings, and that was a process that I had to work through. But had I started that in elementary school, I think that would have been so beneficial. And my last one was to ask questions when things are unclear. So I know when we sit in these meetings and they throw out all these acronyms and small group testing and all of this stuff is just kind of thrown at you super quick. I always try to look at my parents in those meetings and as a teacher and say, is there anything that just didn't make sense? And they don't really speak up. And I know it's overwhelming to sit at a table. I haven't had to do it for my own child yet. It's something that kind of nerve wracking for me, but just being able to know that you can ask questions. Like, don't sit there and just think that you have to know everything they're talking about, because you probably won't. And if you ask, that's, I mean, they want you to ask. Like, you are there, they have you at the table for a reason. So those were my 3 things.
Thank you, Brantley. I love those. All right, Catherine or Madeira?
So while we know our child best, their teacher really does know them as well, and probably sees a little different side of them than we do. And I think it's important that we ask for the teacher's thoughts, opinions on different situations or different problems or whatever the case may be, you know. So what can we do to help with this at home? We know it's a struggle at school. We haven't seen it at home, but how can we support you in that? And again, that whole team aspect is really super important, and the communication that goes along with that.
Well, because just like how we want the teacher to listen to us and take what we say to heart, you know, sometimes you're right. The teachers see a different side of our kids, you know, that it is, oh, wait, I didn't realize that he knew how to tie his shoes. He did that out at recess. Or one day I saw my son, the now 18-year-old, in his classroom, and he's got 2 little girls tying his shoes. Now, he knew how to tie his shoes, right? But he had these people, teacher, kids, everybody convinced, oh, I don't know how to tie my shoes. You know, I have fine motor deficits. No, he knew how to tie his shoes. And so you're right. Sometimes other people see other sides that we don't see. And so it's good to get that perspective as well. Madeira, what would be your golden rules, your top 2 or 3?
Okay, well, I think Brantley and Catherine did hit on 2 of them, but I had more. But like what Catherine was saying about, you know, acknowledging like your teacher's input and what they know as well, and working with them. And but one of the ones that I had was, let's see, I wrote mine down too, Brantley, was to, after communicating with your child's teacher, or even at an IEP meeting or just a conversation, to follow up with an email. I like to follow up with an email, one, because I do feel like it leaves a paper trail and it shows you exactly what was discussed. And because it also gives you clarity to make sure that you were both on the same page, and that what you heard or thought you heard was definitely what was said. And then to let her know, you know, that if there's any other questions that they have, to please feel free to reach out to you. So that was one. Another one was to regularly check in, even if there aren't any fires to put out, even if there aren't any problems. Because it's kind of like, you know, kind of like us. We like to hear, you know, we want to know what issues you might be dealing with, but we like to hear the good stuff too. So, and I feel like teachers, they could use that. And so regularly checking in with them, that can be used as an opportunity to acknowledge the work that they're putting in with your child. That can be used as an opportunity to tell them, you know, thank you for doing something, or I see that this is working. Randall's had a great week this week. It looks like what you suggested is working. So it gives the teacher, you know, I guess kind of like a boost, and let her know that she's on the right track as well. So constant, you know, that constant communication. And then the other one was kind of like what Brantley was saying, you know, about we don't always know everything and how they, you know, have all of the acronyms and things like that. And also, though, we sometimes might be nervous about asking questions and asking them if it was something discussed in the last meeting. And, you know, it's like, wait a minute, I remember that we went over this, but I don't remember the details of it. So if you don't remember the details, it's okay to ask them. If you have to ask every IEP meeting until it clicks, or contact them and ask again until it registers, just don't be afraid, to do that, and be honest with yourself. I don't know this, I don't remember this, and then be honest with them, because sometimes we just don't know. We don't know.
Well, and you know what? Not to toot our own horns, but we're all reasonably intelligent people here. And so if we don't know the answer, there's probably somebody else sitting around that table that doesn't know the answer either, and that is wondering the same thing. And if nothing else, say you're having that conversation one-on-one with the teacher, then the teacher might realize, if Madeira Lawton isn't getting this, if Brantley Smith and Catherine Pageant aren't getting this, I probably got some other parents who didn't understand that note I sent home, and maybe I need to clarify it. Because sometimes
Yeah.
whenever you're in the trenches and you're doing something all day long, it's kind of like if you reread something that you've written, you can't find your own mistakes because you've looked at it too many times. And so if I'm a teacher and I'm sending out a note, to me, it makes perfect sense. I mean, it's downright genius. If I've written it right, that's what I think. I don't realize, maybe this doesn't make sense to other people. And so, so I think you're exactly right, Madeira. Always ask those questions. Because number one, probably somebody else has the same question. And number two, if they don't, you know what, you need the answer. So, well, I see that, man, we are right up on our time. I really, really appreciate everybody joining us tonight. I appreciate Brantley, Madeira, and Catherine. You're sharing your personal experience, your lived experience with us tonight, because it's one thing to read it in a book. It's one thing to look for some ideas online or Pinterest, but it is totally something else whenever you're just sitting here having a nice chat with moms and getting some good advice. So thank you so much, ladies. And I did put in the chat for everybody else, if anybody has any questions, if you need any specific help, or if there's anything that you wanted to ask, feel free to reach out to us at Family Connection. We are here and always happy to help. We know the school year is about to start, and that's part of why we did this, because we want to get off on the good foot. So thank you so much for joining us tonight, and we'll see everybody soon. Bye-bye.